Thanks, Matthew. Thank you for your help. And hi again, everyone. I can see there's now 15 people. That's really cool. I'm glad to see you all. First thing, if you want to follow along on the Miro board, we've pinned the link to the top of the chat. I'm also going to share my screen, so if you don't want to open another window, that's fine too. You can just follow along right here. Let's just do that now. There we are. I can see some of you are already on the board. That's great. That's always nice to see. We've got an hour, so I'll just do a very quick intro of who I am, and the more interesting intro is going to be who you are. My name's Sabine. I am a UX designer and founder of a company in Vienna. We work with team development and build software, but also trainings like services and workshops for team development. And I've been hosting a UX book club in Vienna for the last 4 or 5 years, I think. We've done over 40 books. And I'm really happy to be part of Convey UX today. I think it looks like you're all very familiar with Miro. If not, there's a little arrow off to the left where you can see the basic principles in case you get confused. If you're interested in UX books, there's also a little button later on. You can subscribe to the newsletter if you want to join, because even though I'm in Vienna, Austria, and it's evening time here, you can join our sessions from anywhere in the world. And we have about 4 sessions a year at the moment doing different books. The book today is Life and Death Design, What Life-Saving Technology Can Teach Everyday Designers. It's a fairly new book by Katie Swindler, and it's been published by Rosenfeld Media. I've left a few links if you later on want to listen to a talk by Katie or check out what work she does. It's all here. And on this one, I stuck a little post-it here to remind myself. She gives a little trigger warning in the beginning of the book, and I'm going to repeat that here. Because it's about life and death design, some of the examples in the book concern rather traumatic events. One is about suicide, and other events have to do with accidents. It's nothing too graphic or anything like that, but I just wanted to let you know that we might touch on topics like that. Okay, now the more interesting part, for me anyway, is who are you? There's a board on Miro where you can grab a post-it and just write down who you are. And I've got one question for you. And that is, what's the most stressful moment for users of your product or your service? And if you're not currently working on a product or a service, you can just write an example of what was the most stressful moment you recently had using someone else's product or service. You can see people started writing. That's great. I'm going to write my own, so I'm also doing something. Already. Oh yeah, surely the adding many users to an interface to manage them, that's actually another part of our product too. That can be really stressful. Especially if you have to import other documents. Customers calling in, yeah. Any customer support system situations. Cool. Oh, an inefficient design system, that causes more stress for the designers, doesn't it? But that's also a user, so totally works. Okay, I see Aaron writing there. You have to enlighten me. I don't know what an EHR is. You can write it in the chat if you want. Julie, were you trying to say something? I had a request in the moderation. Oh, electronic health record. There we go. Thanks. Hi, Julie.
Hello. Yeah, no, I was just going to agree with you that, yeah, adding users manually is definitely a pain point, and we have solutions that we want to implement to improve that, but these things take time and need to get prioritized, and there's so many competing priorities that one falls down on the list.
Oh, God. Okay. Yeah, that's a tough one. So do you get then customer service calls as well?
Not personally, but yeah, I hear about them.
Okay. Hi, Eunice. Hey. Did you have a story about a stressful moment for users?
Not yet.
That's good. Electronic. Okay. So Aaron, you're working on something that fits right in with the book, as she talks a lot about medical situations, anything where people are under stress. That can be aviation, can be medical, but also unexpected things like, well, maybe not unexpected, but stock trading, any sort of situations. Yeah, and if I think, Kelsey, you're trying to say that users may already come in stressed and it has nothing to do with your product, then that's definitely the right book for you. Cool. As you can see, you can also move on the Miro board and already start answering the next question. I think some of you have already done that. How I usually do it is I ask a more general question that has to do with the topics that are discussed in the book. And then we talk a little about how the book handles this topic. So yeah, the first question is what do you think stress can be good for? Which is not something you think or hear about a lot because you think stress definitely bad. But you have lots of ideas already. Efficiency. Yeah, forcing you to take a step back, definitely. Motivation, personal breakpoints. There's a quote on the right as well from the book that talks a little bit about what stress does. And the way she describes it is really nice, that some functions of our body improve while others go into the background. And the functions that improve are very physical. So you may not be the nicest person under stress, but I guess most of us know that. Cool. There's a lot of positive attitudes towards stress. I like that. That's really cool. Because what she also says in the book is that what we like about being human, that sort of being logical, reasoned, relying on our brains a lot, being empathic, all those nice attributes go in the background when we're stressed. But it helps us move on. And if you look on the board, just one below, you're so fast. You're already on the next board and writing. Amazing. You see the 4 types of stress that she mentions in the book. I think most of you have probably heard about like the healthy kind of eustress. When you have, sometimes it's also called flow, when you have a challenging experience, but it's beneficial and healthy and exciting and it helps you learn and move forward. Then there's hypostress. That's the one I had not heard about before I read the book. That's caused by boredom. So you can be so bored that you're stressed. And then the type of stress we usually talk about when we talk about stress is distress. And there she distinguishes between 2 types, acute right now, and chronic stress that can last over weeks or years. So the book deals mostly with acute stress. And now I have another more personal question, and you've already started answering it here. What are you like when you're under acute stress? Cool. I throw everything away and focus on completing that thing that causes me stress. That's a very healthy way to deal with acute stress. I do the opposite. I try to do everything at once. It's not good. Become short with discussions. Yeah. Yeah, short-tempered definitely, because everything goes away from the nice human and focuses on survival. You can all, if you want, come on and say something and join with sound and video as well if you want to share a bit more about what you are like under stress. It stays in book club. I won't tell anyone.
I was just going to say, Sabine, that my best cure for stress is going out and taking a walk in the open air, taking a sort of half-hour break and just a bit of exercise, bit of physical exercise.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I do that too. I get on my bike,
right,
and ride for an hour. I've become a middle-aged man in Lycra. You heard that one? Mammal. That's apparently one of the most popular ways for men of a certain age to deal with stress is getting an expensive road bike, getting a gear, and going out there. Yeah.
But they have to be in Lycra. Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise you're not fast. Streamlined. But yeah, actually cycling has a few examples that would fit into the book on how to prevent stressful situations, like gadgets and gears that tell you, car approaching, so you won't get startled. There's quite a lot of interesting technology developing for that particular group that has the money and the bikes.
Interesting.
Which is really, it's really helpful because that's the last thing you want, right? When you try to de-stress. Yeah, there's more people who want to sweat, run, hike. Or the opposite, sit down and take deep, long breaths. That also works. Yeah.
It's interesting that you've sort of been talking about or people have been contributing some positive aspects of stress, because stress tends to be used as a word that by definition has negative connotations, I think. And I've always thought of it as that.
Yeah, because we know so much about the effects of prolonged stress and too much of it, but if it was completely useless, it wouldn't exist.
Sure.
It's just no longer useful in the way it once was because our environment's changed so much, but our brain hasn't kept up in that way.
You've talked about the different types of stress, but is there a sort of one-line definition of stress itself that you can contribute?
I can't think of a one-line definition, but in the book she has a lot of detail on what happens in your brain.
Right.
So because this is Rosenfeld, it's always super handy that you can use their images. They're, free to share. So I can share with you what she shows in the book, what the phases are, which brain regions are engaged, and what hormones are released. So it's not a one line, but it's quite a succinct description of what actually happens.
Interesting.
And the phases of this acute stress response are also really interesting because they happen so quickly and so subconsciously that you won't be able to distinguish one phase from another. But in the book, she structures the chapters by those phases and then gives a lot of examples of situations, tools, ideas, stories that have to do with that particular phase of the stress response. So the first one, for example, startle reflex, is usually something that as a designer you try to avoid creating in your users unless some evil overlord tells you to increase newsletter subscription and forces you to put 5 pop-ups that blink, because that's usually something that would startle people. Not in a massive way, but could contribute to stress. Yeah, so it's quite useful because it's not a big fat book on the brain that takes you a year to read and understand. She has this, I think it's about 10 pages or so, that talk about regions of the brain, how it all works, and how it fits together, and all based in research, and all illustrated with lots of examples. So let's take a quick look. Oh, lots of stories. Yeah, and someone's already mentioned the freezing, that you might freeze up if you can't take that step back. And that is this part of the stress response that most of us would know as fight or flight. But actually freeze is another quite common part. So you do a very quick assessment of what might work here, fight, or is that pointless, then I might run. And if I can't do either, or if I think I can't do either, then I freeze. And that's one that can be difficult, especially for women in situations where they're assaulted, because depending on the country and the legal situation, if you can't prove that you've defended yourself against an assailant, then your case might not be taken seriously. And women then very often think, oh, but I didn't do anything. Oh my God, maybe I somehow wanted this. But really it was the freeze response. So yeah, a lot of scientists have said we should change it to fight, flight, or freeze to make people more aware that fight and flight are not the only reactions. Yeah, reason comes quite late in the process. And yeah, it doesn't always necessarily determine the action. Again, probably not a surprise when we look at just us being humans. Okay, I'm just looking at the notes. Yeah, if you have prolonged chronic stress, you need to change your perspective for sure. That's a really good comment. And that's a good question. I guess so. If you're exposed to stress, if it doesn't become chronic and you deal with it well, I think you could become more resistant or resilient. You'd have to, wouldn't you? There's an example later in the book where she talks about Neil Armstrong, who in the Korean War pulled out an instruction manual how to use his ejector seat because he didn't know. So his plane was already spiraling out of control and the wing was burning. And he had the nerve to sit there and look through these instructions and go, oh, okay, this is how I do it. And saved his own life like that. So I guess, yeah, if you're in that kind of profession and you've had the right kind of training, then you might be able to read an instruction manual while literally everything's burning around you. I found that a really amazing example. Sadly, a lot of examples always come from war, though, don't they? I don't know if you've noticed. In so many books and so many stories, whether that's management or design, it's always military examples. Cool. That's the tricky question. Can you rely on intuition? Yes, yes, yes. Should be tempered by logic, intuitively. Cool. So tendency, clearly, yes. And it's a huge question for everyone. Psychologists, economists, designers, of course, pretty much every profession. I really like that part in the book because she described an academic relationship between Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, which you might have heard, who's an economist, and Gary Klein, who's a psychologist who started researching intuition in the, I think it was 1970s. And he interviewed a lot of people who claimed to have made decisions, sometimes even by extrasensory inspiration or something like that, where they say, oh, I heard this voice and it told me what to do. And he wanted to find a scientific framework to understand, does intuition work? Is it something, or how does it work? And there's one story in the book that's also really intriguing. There was a fireman who managed to save himself and his crew because he realized that the fire in the kitchen that they were trying to stop was actually a fire in the basement, and he got them all out in time. But he didn't know it was a fire in the basement. He just suddenly had the sensation that something's very wrong here and just yelled at everyone, let's get out. And then later on, when Gary Klein asked him more questions, he realized that there had been a lot of clues that something was very wrong. One was the fire was more hot than usual. Another one was the fire was really quiet. And of course that they couldn't stop the fire. That was also a clue. So because he had a lot of experience with fires, a lot of patterns became clear. And he wasn't aware that his brain went through these patterns and made a decision based on patterns. And that's what intuition was. He thought it was some, force from the outside. And yeah, he came to the decision that that's how intuition usually works. We learn things by recognizing patterns. And the more we do it, the better we get at it. And he gave this a name, and it's in this quote here, the naturalistic decision making. That's what he called decisions that are made by intuition. And then at the same time, Kahneman started working on biases. So what Klein calls intuition and says is something that can really help us and that we can rely on. Kahneman said it's the opposite. We're all biased and it's awful and we shouldn't be. And it's our brain tricking us. He won the Nobel Prize for this. But even though they came at the same thing from two different angles, they developed this kind of frenemyship as academics and then wrote a paper together that's on the board here, actually. You can later on maybe leaf through it if you're interested, that they called Conditions for Intuitive Expertise, a Failure to Disagree. Because in the end, even Kahneman had to admit, yes, there is a thing that is intuition and that you can sometimes rely upon. But there are conditions. And the two conditions are that the environment has to be sufficiently regulated to be predictable, and that you need an opportunity to learn about these regularities. So I found it quite funny what professions should not rely on intuition. Stockbrokers, psychiatrists, intelligence analysts, college admissions officers. So if you think about this in the context of artificial intelligence and algorithms and how they learn and how they look at patterns, it's probably worth revisiting these studies. Let me see what's happening in the question underneath. What about designers? Okay. So we can harness archetypes is one answer. We shouldn't blindly rely on intuition. Yep. Yeah, hopefully we're not under acute stress. I agree. That would be the ideal. Cool. Interesting. I think my answer would always be it depends, but that drives everyone crazy. That always happens in UX meetings, doesn't it? All the UX designers answer every question with it depends, and then no one wants to talk to us anymore. Backing up with research, that's always a good idea too. I'll tell you about one more example from the book. And that example was about a Dutch team who, under lots of pressures that you're all probably familiar with, you know, not enough budget, not enough time to do research, all those things, they were tasked with redesigning a booking app in, oh my God, Indonesia. Yes, it says it right here. And they applied a lot of strategies and aesthetics and patterns that they used from Europe. And that's the design on the left, the booking local, is the name of the app, the one that doesn't have many images and isn't so bright. But when they then tested those designs with local users in Indonesia, people thought it was a scam because they were used to websites, digital applications that had a lot of color and showed happy people, showed life. And when they saw something unfamiliar, they thought, no, this can't be real. Which is the sort of response we have to something unfamiliar, because back in the day of saber-toothed tiger, unfamiliar might be an animal that could kill us. And that seriously still influences how we judge a design. So in the end, this team then worked together with a local team in Indonesia, with a local design team, and the design they had in the end is the one on the right, which looks pretty different. And the, I think she was the lead designer, she did a talk about the experience and said, if you just rely on your intuition and you're designing for a community you don't know, then you might get into trouble really quick. Because you're not trained on the patterns that are common to that community. And that doesn't even have to be a different culture. Could just be a different age group or a completely different profession. So, yeah, one of the sentences I really liked was the one about empathy. As important as empathy is in design, humility is just as critical. So just our empathy practices, all our tools are sometimes not enough. You need to involve people who actually have developed the right kind of intuition, if you want. But yeah, she also talks about how it depends on what you're designing and who is going to use your design for what. So if you are designing for a tool that psychiatrists may use, then you should steer them more towards not just relying on their intuition, because they might fall prey to biases, because their environment is not regular. So yeah, it gets really interesting and very detailed. But maybe that's my favorite bit about thinking about intuition. Yeah, and absolutely, like it says here in the note, we must be able to identify where our intuition comes from and self-reflect. I think that's probably lesson number one out of all of this. Great. Oh, Aaron, I didn't see your question, sorry. I keep clicking back and forth so I can be on the board. Oh, you mean the depend? Yeah, it depends. It depends upon what the question was and what it depends. But usually there's no simple answer. I think that's why I became a designer. I don't like simple answers. There we go. Oh, you're so quick. Everyone's ahead of me. I'm slowly following. What harm can design do? To hate UX designers, that's a good one. Seizures, yes. That is very true, sadly. That's actually happened. It's not in this book, but there was a story I once read and it was pretty evil, where someone actually tried to do it on purpose in some forum. Wasn't Discord, something similar? If it comes to me, I'll tell you. But yeah, that could happen. Misleading. So people buy something they don't want. brand might lose face, inaccuracies, all sorts of addictive patterns that get boosted. Yeah. Overcomplicating things, that's sort of mild harm. Unless it's in a stressful situation, then it can really quickly turn into serious harm. Yeah, and the quote on the right talks about it again, the fight or flight response that you might be triggering, and you don't know how that might look like in the person you might be triggering it with. Yeah, just for I'm just going to add one more bit to the epileptic seizure one, because that story really stayed in my mind, and I'll try and find it and post it onto the board later. Because I have epilepsy, and that story really affected me, that people would do something like that, try to induce it in people on purpose. But just a little fact thing. It's actually very few people where you can induce a seizure just with light flashing. That's a very, very small group. It's not all clear why seizures are triggered. That's, again, different in everyone. But that light thing is thankfully much rarer than you think. But yes, still, people do that. Often, maybe inadvertently, but yeah. Okay, so that's the bit now with the tragic story that some of you might have heard about this young man who was trading in this Robinhood app, where you could trade in stocks even if you had no knowledge about stocks. And that was exactly the case. I think he was only 20. He had no money, really. He didn't have a steady job, I think, but he could invest up to 20,000. And then one day he opened his app. And if you zoom in here, you can see that it said his buying power was minus $730,000, which he interpreted as that's how much he is in debt now. There was no way on the interface to get in touch with anyone. There was no explanation, no nothing. I think he then got messages that he had to pay 100 and something thousand within the next week or so. And yeah, tragically, he actually killed himself. So this is a very extreme case of fight or flight. Fight can turn inward and can turn to self-harm. And this being like the worst case scenario. And I think it was in all the media, and it was lots of factors. First and foremost, of course, he shouldn't have been able to even invest so much money that he doesn't have. But also one that's maybe really important for us as designers, if there had been a way in that moment for him to speak to a human being, that would have probably saved his life. So she repeats that at the end of the book as well, saying that is one of the things she wants us to take away, that even though digital is what we spend our time with and what we make our money with and what we're told to focus on, and what very often we think is gonna replace a lot of human connection. And when it comes to high stress moments, you need a human. So she also brings a few positive examples, always throughout the book. One is this community, Coral, that has done they have done a lot of research how to build a fair debating platform. And a lot of the trying to get people to not give in to their fight responses, which, on a forum might take the form of harassing others. A lot of that can be stopped by just slowing people down. So I haven't been on Twitter in a while, but once upon a time, Twitter also tried to do the right thing. And they had similar interventions. When the AI detected some harmful, offensive language, it did say, you maybe want to think again before you tweet this. but also reminding people to check out what they're sharing before they share. And she's got some numbers in the book as well. So I don't have the exact numbers in my head, but it was somewhere around the, 30% of the people would actually review a tweet. And some would then not send it. And similar numbers for people who would actually click on the link and read the article. Angel, you're writing something about Greek tragedies being built on misinformation. I can't remember what, because I didn't see when you wrote that. Was that to do with the Robin Hood story? And then you've got, oh, okay, yeah. It is, it's a really sad story. Yeah, and then you've got the Greek tragedies where they try to avoid the information they don't like. Like the oracle said, you will marry your mother, and then you do everything so it doesn't happen, and it still happens. That should not be an inspiration for UX designers. We can take steps. There was that one moving. I'm gonna lock that down. Cool. You're ahead of me again. How do you support stressed people when they need to make sense of unfamiliar information? Ground them, make mistakes. Yeah, there's also, like, when you say allowing them to make mistakes, there's also these moments where you really don't want to point out mistakes because if they don't matter, especially. Variety of knowledge levels, that's really important too. Yeah, so stress induces this hyperfocus that can temporarily be a good thing, but only if you can hyperfocus on one thing and don't have to take in 10 at once. So the clear and simple that you've mentioned in your post-its, that takes us in that direction. I'm gonna take you down to another example that shows it pretty clearly. This is about designing information for parents who've just gotten the news that their child has a serious condition and are now asked if they want to participate in a clinical trial. And of course, medical personnel is hoping that they say yes. So on the left is a diagram, I suppose we would call that was part of the original permissions sign up information sheet. That if you imagine you've just had difficult news and you're worried about your child and you get this, you probably won't want to agree to anything, but I don't know, I'd throw it across the room. So the task was to redesign that. And on the right, you see the results. What are your thoughts when you're looking at those three little comic style things? You can just write them in the chat if you want. You don't have to do post-its. Like, what's your first impression of this? Do you like the illustrations? Yeah, conversational, absolutely. Consumable. Oh, Angel, that's a very good question. It's actually something she discusses in the book as well. That would be such an important button. because she has another, now that's going a little bit away from the clinical trial, but never mind. She has a story of a mom whose toddler fell out the window. He was fine. He survived. Everything was good. But as he was laying there and she was panicking and she ran down, she grabbed the house phone, I think, and she wanted to ring 911. But she was so under shock that she couldn't see numbers anymore. And luckily her 8-year-old son was there, and she just handed him the phone and said, ring 911. And he did it, and it all worked out fine. But that can happen. And SOS buttons are really hard to trigger usually, unless you have an iPhone, because Apple has found ways to make it easier. I have activated my SOS button once on a bike ride. And I think the Austrian police were actually tracking my ride and then wrote me some messages later on. They didn't say anything about it. It seems to happen a lot. Yeah, so we don't have 911, but stuff happens, gets triggered automatically. I think it was pressing the button 5 times, and that happened because my phone was in my bag. So Angel, that something like that might have happened. Exactly, yeah, the 5 times might have happened to you. And it's a big thing, yeah, the sort of accidental false calls went up. But I don't think people have found a good solution for this yet. I think it's on the screen before you power off your phone on the iPhone, but on other phones, I wouldn't know where to find it. So yeah, that's a design challenge that we can all work on. Cool. Just to come back to the clinical trials. You've probably looked down there already a little bit. They had some guidelines that they followed when they redesigned this. Small bite-sized pieces, written and visual. Being able to go back and forth easily when you've forgotten what you read earlier. Simple language, modeling behavior that you like people to exhibit in the situation. And make it relatable. I think that's the point of the illustration. They had different illustration styles as well, where sometimes it was more detailed, more like a comic, and then they settled on one that's very neutral, but most people can somehow see themselves in there, even though, the illustrations don't have eyes, but that makes it actually easier to say, yeah, that could be me. And I think they did an amazing job there. And I sometimes think it's a little bit like with accessibility. When you make something so much better for people under extreme stress, then it's better for everybody if you do it well. And I think that's what happened here, because even if it's not your child, but you're just assisting, or you're in any other sort of situation where you get information like that, it would make more sense and make it easier to learn for sure, if it followed all these guidelines. Yeah, and in the note here of if the solution would be to use the language of the other, I think that's what they try to do a little bit here. That is definitely a thing that works. So what the guy here says, the word experimental makes me nervous. Does that mean you would be experimenting on my child? I'm pretty sure they've heard this before, and that's from a real conversation. So that's definitely a good way to de-stress people. Right. So after she goes through all these chapters that sort of correspond to the various stages of the stress response, she has one chapter that's titled, I think, Hero by Design. Because she says one of the things that design can definitely do is try and bring out the best in people, so they kind of are able to perform their best in a stressful situation. And she says what you want to do is encourage people and try and support their self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is this, it's almost like it's optimism. It's this belief that you're going to make it. Okay. And now I have a stressful and awkward moment because my supermarket food delivery is half an hour early. And I apologize, but Matthew, could you just maybe...
Of course.
I'm just going to be gone for 2 seconds.
Absolutely.
That's an unexpected digital event. They're sending me this lovely message saying we were faster than we thought.
I think this is something you've actually staged for us to give us a real life example.
Yeah, I wish. I'll be back in 1 second.
Okay, great. Yeah, I wonder what she's got in her delivery. I'm intrigued now. This is great. I'm really enjoying this session. It's lovely to have so much interaction. I feel that I've really been picking up on the wisdom of the crowd here and getting so many different ideas. And it's nice to be so involved in a presentation. It doesn't feel like a presentation. It's not. It's a collaboration of ideas. And I really love the way that Sabine is doing this around this book. Has anyone else read the book, by the way? Be interested to know if you can tell me in the chat window. Would love to hear your views on what you felt when you read it. Otherwise, do just continue to post on the board. Oh, yeah, Julie, yeah. Only one person's read the book. Yeah. Well, I've no doubt many of us will be looking for the book after this presentation and will be reading the book. So what we need to do is to all get back together in a month's time when we've all read it and have another chat, have another session, and see if any of us have changed our minds. I wish we could zoom in on Sabine's bookshelf there.
Hey, sorry about that.
That's fine. No problem.
He's not found my door apparently, but no. Let's see. Really sorry. You were looking at the shelf behind.
Yeah, yeah.
Former book club books, but also other books. Lots of stuff.
Great. Sure there is. Well, people have continued contributing. I did ask for how many other people had read the book, and it looks like no one has. But I'm sure, as I said, I'm sure people will be after this presentation. Julie says it's just like every other book club she's ever attended. Only one person's actually read the book.
Yeah, I've had some where we had maybe 4 or 5 people.
Okay.
I think Melissa Perry, Escaping the Build Trap, that was a popular one that people had actually read. And that's why I need to have the shelf here so I can see them, because I can't remember otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the Jake Knapp, the Sprint book, that was one that people had read.
Oh, right.
That was pre-pandemic. It was,
right.
We still had the book club at our office and we ran out of chairs for that one.
Oh, did you?
It was a big co-working space and people from the other offices all came along. So sometimes you get like proper highlight books that have a little fan base.
Sure. Yeah.
And then you get.
But I like this one because this is introducing us to a book that we might otherwise have missed.
Yeah, I think that's how most people use book clubs in the end.
Yeah.
To see if it's worth getting that book and actually committing. Yeah. But yeah, I agree with Julie. That's a lot of book clubs. People haven't read the book.
Anyway, Sabine, I think we've got about 10 minutes left, haven't we?
Yeah, I just saw that. We're almost at the end anyway, so I'm going to have a quick look at what you said. Encouraging people, yeah, give them a good future version of what's going to happen. Test with them what works, confirm previous successes. Yeah, exactly, about the mistakes. Give like feedback so they know what's happening, but it doesn't have to be a terribly flashing red error message, or maybe not the minute you start typing. You know, those ones. Yeah, language, giving support in words, all those things.
Yeah, I hate those messages that appear the moment I start typing, telling me I've made an error.
Yeah.
Just because I've only typed one character. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's all, it's usually just elements, isn't it, that are already pre-coded. And that's what you end up with, unless you want to make the effort. But yeah, I find that stressful, especially when it's red. Well, when she talks about how to make our users the heroes, and how to use design to support people make the right decisions, she talks about the Apollo 13 mission, and she distills those 4 factors that allow people to become heroes. And the first one is this unadulterated professionalism, which in the Apollo 13 story had to do with preparing for every scenario of what could possibly go wrong. So the whole Houston, we have a problem situation had been rehearsed before. In fact, in one rehearsal, it had led to the whole virtual, not the real crew, dying. So they were like, uh-oh, you have to really think this one through. And in this photo in the back, there are these binders. And that's where they stored all this information about what to do in this case, cross-referenced with, the other thing that could go wrong. So people were really pulling a solution off the shelf that was well designed. It's like a perfect information architecture, content management, all of that right there. And that allowed people to leverage that professionalism. So the unspoken heroes are the designers, and I guess they weren't called designers and content managers, but that's what they did, of those binders in the background. The other things that she mentions is, of course, training, discipline, and clear leadership, which if you're an astronaut, you've gone through that. But also the inspired improvisation. So they had to adapt a filter, and they had to do that with whatever was available on the spacecraft. And they did it mostly with duct tape, from what I understood. So that in itself is an interesting design challenge, both for us to be good at improvising and also to allow our users to sometimes improvise. And even the luck and skill one, she then talks a lot about redundancies in the systems, that sometimes we need to consider what our users can do when stuff doesn't work. And a little bit like what you mentioned before, Matthew, about the session you were in earlier, that sometimes an interface can't be all slick and simple. Sometimes things are a bit more complex. Yeah. And if you're hiding everything under a slick surface, you take the opportunity away to tinker and to try things out. So that's sort of close to what she talks about here.
Like everything Apple, Julie says.
Exactly. That's exactly the example she uses, where Apple went a different path and now we can't fix anything. Yeah. Our CTO just took 2 days off because he really wanted to prove that somehow with a lot of tweaking, he can get the latest Apple OS run on a 12-year-old machine. He succeeded in the end. That's his idea of a holiday. But yeah, you need 30 years of programming experience to do stuff like that. Yes, and we are actually coming to the end. I've left a few resources that you mentioned in the book. These are all just links. So I might have to unlock them. Normally, Miro gives you this little source icon. And when you click on that, it opens the link in your browser. One is a podcast that you might have heard of, the 99% Invisible. It's all about sounds in hospitals. It's really interesting about sound design and how too many sounds at once obviously aren't conducive to emergency situations or stressful situations, and how they've tried to deal with this by changing the nature of those sounds. Another interesting story is it's called Womanikin. There is data that in case of a heart attack or any sort of emergency involving a woman, people are hesitant to, I can't think of the word, when we give the massage, the heart massage, they won't do it because they don't want to touch a woman's breasts. So women are more likely to die because people worry about things they shouldn't be worrying about in that moment. So they've built these, like dummies that are a woman, because we usually train on a dummy that's just some androgynous body, to get people who do first aid training to actually practice on a woman who has breasts, so they won't then freeze up when it actually happens. So that's really clever, I think. Yeah. And some other examples of design that actually helps people be heroes. And the very last thing, some of you have seen this probably. This is our list of past books. So in case you're interested, they're all here. You can get in touch with me either via the newsletter subscription link, or I'm just going to actually give you my email in the chat here. If you want to know anything about any of these books, just send me a message or connect on LinkedIn. And yeah, if you have any suggestions to make, you can just copy and paste the link on the bookshelf. And we keep that and it grows. And if you want to make an indication of what you're interested in, that's my tiny little research project here to see what people want to read. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions or anything you wanted to say before you head on to your next session.
Yeah, we've literally just got a couple of minutes, I think, left of this session. So do feel free to join us on the audio or video. We'd love to see you. Or use the chat window. Yeah.
Yeah.
Saw a couple of you earlier.
CPR, what I was looking for. Absolutely. I should have checked.
CPR.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
It's late here. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Sabine. It was wonderful. A lovely interactive presentation from which I certainly learned a lot and really enjoyed it. And a beautifully prepared Miro board. I loved all the resources and the examples and visually it was a beautiful piece of work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Matthew. That's great. Cool.
Have a good evening then, Sabine.
You too. Have a good evening. I'm going to say bye and leave.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.